How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at my Texas Chainsaw Massacre complete collection. We're going to be taking a look at every single movie in the series. We're going to see the physical media as well as do little mini movie reviews for each one. And no major spoilers when I do the movie reviews, but that being said, I do want to say my piece on a few plot points and make sure you guys are familiar with what the movie's about. Now, these are Blu-rays and DVDs. It's only the first one, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the last one, Leatherface, that I have on Blu-ray. The rest are DVDs, and I should probably do a little upgrading. I believe Scream Factory put out a few new Blu-rays for the original sequels. That I should probably check them out. They're probably pretty good. Now, before we get into it, I do want to say that this is going to be a two-parter. Apparently, I have a lot to say with these Texas Chainsaw movies, and I kept, when I did the early takes for this, getting really long videos, and my camera won't make videos that long. It kept cutting me off, so I've decided to do part one here, is the original saga plus a secret bonus item that I'll bring in for a second. And then part two is going to be the remake universe and then the reboot universe. So 4 movies now, 4 movies in part two, and part two should get up pretty soon. So without further ado, let's just jump right in and talk about the first one. I have this 40th anniversary edition from Dark Sky Films here, and this edition has 4 feature commentaries. 2 of them are new, and one of them is a solo commentary from the film's director, Tobe Hooper. So I can't pass that up, and that's a really cool and a good thing and a good reason to buy this edition. But that being said, I should probably also pick up a DVD because this only has the commentaries. It doesn't have any other special features, and I should pick up a DVD for those extra special features, but this has an all-new 4K digital restoration. It's not a 4K disc, but it's got that cool restoration. Anyway, this movie, for those of you who haven't seen it, is an all-time classic. It's a top 10 personal favorite horror films of mine, personal favorite films in general, and definitely belongs on the list of top 10 horror films of all time. It's about a group of kids. They're going to see their grandfather's grave because the cemetery he was in was quite recently vandalized. After that, they go to their abandoned ancestral home, and they find that their neighbor is Leatherface in his family, and of course it leads to this really fun pre-Halloween slasher. This falls into the true crime inspired slashers between Psycho and Halloween. Other movies, think like, say, the Toolbox Murders or Alice Sweet Alice or even Black Christmas, which would come out a few months later, and loosely inspired by Ed Gein, hence Leatherface's mask made out of human flesh. But it has a almost documentary style filmmaking and an opening text crawl that led a lot of people to believe that this was a real story, even though it wasn't. And there's so many cool things. Leatherface is kind of like a modern Frankenstein, you know, a cool design with the mask and the chainsaw, but he's not intrinsically evil. It's just the world he's placed in, and that is what drives him to that, is, you know, where he was put and the family and the environment around him. It's a really interesting characters, but one of the other interesting things is this movie, they wanted it to be a PG movie. This was before PG-13 was around, and they had to really fight to get it to get an R, but because they were shooting hoping to be PG, there's very little blood or gore in this movie, and very little on-screen violence. But because the directing is shot in such a realistic way, and the acting is so visceral, the acting, it feels real, and in turn people walk away from this movie swearing they've seen shots that aren't in this movie, you know, violent and crazy stuff that's just not on screen, but people think it was, and that's crazy. there's the disc, pretty similar to the cover there. And if we take the disc out, we get one of the film's famous shots, an up-angled shot, where we see her walking towards the house, the big house, and it's like looming over them, and then the Texas sun above her. This is one of my favorite shots of the movie, and I'm so glad Dark Sky Films chose to use this shot for the interior artwork on this Blu-ray release. It is really nice. I love this shot. I should get it printed out and hang it up on the wall or something. But anyway, moving along, that was the first movie, and this is 1974, and eventually, whoa, let's not have the DVDs or Blu-rays fall over. Eventually, we would get a direct sequel, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, with Dennis Hopper, but this is actually from 1986. So, 1986, it's been quite some time. How come it took so long to get a part 2? Well, the thing is, Tobe Hooper didn't want to do a direct sequel. So, in 1984 for the original, that special bonus item I wanted to show you guys, Eaten Alive, another Tobe Hooper film from 1976. And this movie, even though it's called Eaten Alive, it could just as easily have been called the Louisiana Gator Massacre. This hotel owner is feeding people to his alligator, and it's a really cool backroads horror movie. And I think this is what Tobe Hooper wanted to do instead of a direct sequel. He wanted to do spiritual sequels, a whole bunch of different movies about the crazy, horrific things you might find in America's back roads. And this is a really good, underrated Tobe Hooper film. I really do like this. I should do a full review on this eventually as well. But anyway, I think this is what he wanted to do instead of a direct sequel, spiritual sequels, but this didn't make near as much money as Chainsaw, and eventually, due to high demand from both audiences and producers, Hooper eventually gave in and gave us a direct sequel, but he didn't want to do the same thing twice. And if we flip to the back here, we can see this quote from the LA Times that it really tells the movie. Even wilder, gorier, keep in mind the first one really wasn't gory, even wilder, gorier, and funnier than the original. Funnier, and that's really what surprised people. Although, really it shouldn't have. The poster for this movie is actually a parody. It's actually a parody of the Breakfast Club poster. Look them up side by side. It's kind of funny, but even with that, people weren't expecting this to be loud and over the top and have humor in it. And this is one of those movies that people initially really didn't like, but after enough time had passed, it got a reappraisal, and now people really like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, but it was not that way for a long, long time. But anyway, this movie, you have Dennis Hopper there. He's a relative of Sally and Franklin from the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, and he's looking for the family because they disappeared, and he's got 2 chainsaws here to challenge Leatherface to a battle there. So he's looking for them. The gang is, the family is hiding out in an abandoned amusement park, which is a great setting for a bigger over-the-top sequel, Texas Battleland, and they're hiding out there, and apparently it has like underground tunnels and stuff. It's really cool. And then there's a clue in a phone call to a radio station, which gets the radio personality Stretch is her name, involved in the movie, and she actually, there's this fun subplot where Leatherface actually ends up falling in love with her, and he doesn't know what to do about it. You know, the family doesn't like that he's falling in love, but he doesn't know what to do, and you get the cool, the Sawless family scene. Open it up, just a shiny disc, but I really do like this movie. It's in the vein of underrated sequels. Just know going in, it's more over the top and has an element of humor in it. But I really did like, Dennis Hopper chainsaw fighting Leatherface in an underground underground amusement park basement thing. It's crazy. And then Stretch is a good final girl too. I really liked her. You actually see her briefly on a TV in one of the other sequels, I believe. She becomes a reporter, and that makes her the only non-family member to appear in more than one Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Anyway, moving right along, we have Leatherface, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and you get Leatherface with this spiky silver saw that's really big, and it has the quote, "The saw is family," from part 2, and this big cool saw actually does make an appearance in the climax of this movie. And if you note up top, it says includes the R-rated and unrated versions. You definitely want to go for that unrated version. A lot of the special effects are missing their pop if you watch the R version. And I believe they actually had Tom Savini on the special effects in this movie, so you really want the unrated version of those effects. He puts the teeth in terror. But basically with this movie, you get Leatherface and Grandpa hanging out with a new branch of their family, so you get a few more people that are new family members that we haven't seen before, and you get another group of teens wandering in. It's very sequel-y, and it's a lot like the first one, but it tries to go bigger and over the top with their gore and their, stuff like that. So it's a very sequel-y sequel. But one character I really like in this one that never shows up again is there's this little girl who people believe to be Leatherface's daughter, and she shows up. You don't really know where she came from, and Leatherface is there with her, and it's a really cool and interesting character to have the slasher villain with a daughter. And I would like to know what happened to her. Does she grow up to become a slasher killer as well? I would have loved to seen a movie about Leatherface's daughter, but sadly, we don't see any of her after this movie. A lot of fans joke that they ate her, which I hope they didn't, but it might have happened. But I really would have liked to see more of Leatherface's daughter. Open it up, you get the disc, which is a different picture of Leatherface there, and you see he's more scary looking this time around. And there's this other picture of him. He's got this more grungy looking style to him this time. Anyway, it's a cool movie, not great art, but if you want a gory chainsaw sequel, it's fun. Moving along to the last of the original timeline, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 4, The Next Generation. And yeah, it doesn't actually say Part 4, but this is Part 4. And you may notice something about this DVD right off the bat. These two faces here. You get Renee Zellweger as the final girl, and the new head of the family, Matthew McConaughey. These are both native Texan actors, and these are both before they were famous appearances. And it's really something for that they were able to get these two in the project. Matthew McConaughey really carries this movie. Leatherface and Grandpa, once again, go off to another branch of their family, and you get to see more of Leatherface's family. But Matthew McConaughey is not actually a blood relative. He's part of this group that wants to send waves of terror around the world, a secret organization, and they send him there to make a similar event as scary as the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to spread terror across the countryside. So that's kind of a crazy idea. He's a really crazy and over-the-top performance, and on top of his attitude, he has this robotic leg brace that he controls with a TV remote, and he has a whole box of TV remotes so that he always has control of the brace. But, TV remote, robotic leg brace, crazy Matthew McConaughey performance, it's worth seeing for him alone. Sadly, outside of Matthew McConaughey, a lot of this movie doesn't work super well. It's a standard B slasher for the most part. But the interesting thing as to why this movie doesn't work super well is the director wasn't a fan of slasher sequels, and he was trying to do a movie critiquing the slasher sequels rather than actually just making a slasher sequel. But because people don't know you're joking, it looks like you just made a bad movie. You gotta let people in to know it's a joke if you're gonna be doing a parody, and they didn't. So in turn, it just looks like a bad movie, and you don't know, oh, this is supposed to be a parody, but it's not super funny, like, Scream or Behind the Mask would be later. There's the shiny disc, and there's this pop art poster as the paper there, and you see Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger up at the top. The chainsaw going to the lip image. This is actually, talk about the parody, the only movie where Leatherface doesn't actually murder someone with a chainsaw. And then you get Leatherface in this feminine mask. Now, I always thought that was kind of an interesting thing with Leatherface as a character, that when he put on a new mask, he would slowly take on, new habits and, new mannerisms, because he was trying to interpret the mask of who he was wearing as part of his personality. So that's, pretty cool. But there is something that is kind of problematic with this. Apparently, part of the parody, and I really want to stress this, their words, not mine, they felt slasher villains were getting weaker and not as scary and gruff as they once were. They felt that slasher villains were dulled down, so they had Leatherface dress up like a woman. And again, I want to stress their words, not mine. They had him dress up like a woman to convey the fact that he was now weak and feminine. So that part probably doesn't date super well. But it is an interesting movie, primarily to see early Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. And Matthew McConaughey does have a really cool performance. But outside of that, it's kind of a mess. And I wish, if we were going to get a parody, to have it be a smart parody like Behind the Mask or Scream, but it didn't quite nail that idea, or just a straight sequel instead. But cool for Matthew McConaughey. That being said, we've covered the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre timeline. There are still 4 movies, but this is the original continuity here, these 4 movies. So in a little bit, I'll have the video up for the remake timeline and the reboot timeline. So I'll see you guys again soon with that. Anyway, if you stuck around so far, thank you for watching. And to everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You're really helping the channel out. I do primarily horror movies on here, so if that sounds like something you like, I definitely recommend sticking around. And if you want to see more, I'll put a relevant playlist on the bottom. That being said, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. And relevant playlists on the bottom, probably more of my complete movie series stuff. Have a good day.